Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take.
On today's Your Take, I'm joined by a young singer-songwriter. My guest is greatly inspired by the 1960s folk revival scene and is beginning to make a name for herself on the live music scene. My guest took part in a TEDX Talk after the release of a single, Against the Tide. She was included in the lineup of the Filkin's Drift Ensemble and is recognised for writing songs about her love of literature, whilst exploring sociological, ecological and personal themes. This year, my guest started composing the music for a BBC Radio 3 drama called Middlemarch, toured the UK as Blair Dunlop's special guest on his 20-date spring tour, and will be releasing a highly anticipated debut album, Dwelling By the Weir. Today, I'm joined by Ellie Gowers. We discuss Ellie's childhood, her love of music and her influences, the songwriting process and making music, the new album, and what is a long-term musical plan. Good morning, Ellie.
Good morning. Hello.
A very warm welcome. Thanks for joining me on this morning to be a guest on Your Take.
Oh, thank you for having me.
We've kind of very much been on a kind of musical theme with the channel, and we've spoken to quite a lot of musicians and songwriters about their lives and their perspectives on the journey and their love of music, where their influences come from. Obviously, today we're going to be talking about your music, your inspirations, which we kind of mentioned briefly in the introduction. But to start with, I wanted to go back to the very beginning, if you don't mind.
I'll see what I can remember. Long time ago.
you grew up in the county of Warwickshire. I wanted to ask what year you were born and what are your recollections from childhood, and do you have siblings?
Yeah, I was born in 1996, so nearly 26 years ago, which is quite scary. It was a lovely place to grow up. It's beautiful around here. I live in the county town in Warwick, so it's so much rich history here, which I'm sure I'll get onto later. But it was a beautiful place to grow up. It's very verdant and full of beautiful open countryside and canals and rivers. Had a very normal-ish childhood growing up here. I shared my house with my younger brother, who is out living his best adult life, doing civil engineering and everything that I'm not doing. I grew up with a younger brother, generally very normal childhood. Nothing too interesting happened. It's a lovely place to grow up.
You've given us a portrait on the location where you were brought up, and I kind of want to move on to a little bit of background just about your parents. And I wanted to ask if you could tell us what they did for a living, and do you come from a musical family, and what sort of music was being played in the Gowers household growing up as a child?
Yeah, so my mum's side are very musical, leaning more towards theatre and amateur dramatics. My mum's involved in the theatre, my grandma's involved in the theatre, my great-grandparents were, they were involved as well. My great-granddad actually played the violin, and a couple of years ago, 2018, I think, we found it in one of my grandma's old wardrobes, and it was all warped and cracked, and I think it still had the original strings on it, and we had it restored and refurbished, so I play that now, which is quite nice. There's a line of music on my mum's side, similar to my dad's family. various musical instruments were played. My dad's got a very good taste in music, so I think that sort of helped broaden my listening when I was younger. People like dad rock bands like Led Zeppelin, that sort of thing, Dream Theater, prog rock type stuff. So that kind of led me into the realms of Alison Krauss and oh my gosh, the name has completely gone from my head. Led Zeppelin, Robert Plant, and that album that they did together, that sort of probably pushed me in the direction of sort of like the Americana songwriting style of things. So yeah, I kind of always had a very broad listening growing up. We had sort of the folky favourites of Kate Rusby and Bellowhead and Paul Brady, people like that. So yeah, very, very healthy mixture of things. Obviously, I mentioned theatre earlier, lots of show tunes and things like that as well. So yeah, just a very, very musical household growing up. But when I was younger, because that was kind of my mum's thing, that's what she would do. So every time we went to the theatre, it was kind of like we were being dragged along to it. So I very quickly decided that I didn't really want to do anything that was artsy and creative. So anything like music or theatre, I completely shunned. And just wanted to do sports, really. So it wasn't until later that I came back to it and finally accepted that it's probably what I had always wanted to do, but never really tried it.
What comes across clearly so far, and is evident, that you come from this very sort of creative family background, and were exposed to kind of roots music from a very young age, and music being played in the household. And you've mentioned folk and country music, and obviously the influence of your dad with 1960s Led Zeppelin as well. I kind of wanted to come on to some of your interests, because you're particularly interested in literature and the traditional folk music. What novels were you reading, and what musicians were you listening to, and kind of why?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, I was always reading. I can't really remember a time where like I started. It's always been there. You know, going to bed at night, it was always part of our routine that we would be read short stories before going. Well, not just short stories, but novels and things like that. We were sort of read to before going to bed, and you know, reading at school and reading after school, and just reading all the time, really. I was just before the age of gaming consoles and phones and things like that. So I think I had a nice balance of, you know, watching a TV show on TV, and then it was time to read a book and whatnot. So yeah, there was kind of a very healthy balance, and reading was always encouraged in our household. And I think I was talking to my grandma about this the other day, in terms of like the classics. I didn't really get into them until I was a bit older, maybe 15 or 16. And before that, I spent a lot of time reading short stories. I had a lot of like anthology books and children's anthology books, and collections of stories. So I spent a lot of time sort of reading those. And I actually found a book, I've got it behind me here, the Hutchinson Treasury of Children's Poetry and Literature. That was one that I was reading every day, day in, day out. Just some of the short stories in there and the poetry just, yeah, really sort of captured my imagination and my interest. And yeah, it's just always been a part of my life, really, reading. And I'm a massive book hoarder now, so I've always got something on the go.
From a keen love of literature, and we've kind of spoken about music being played in the household. Kind of secondly to that, I wanted to ask you about the kind of music you were listening to and discovering kind of off your own back. What was it particularly about kind of folk music that kind of resonated with you, and what kind of artists did you get kind of hooked onto in that particular genre?
Yeah, I mean, when I was growing up and sort of going through sort of later years of primary school and going into secondary school, we were swapping songs through Bluetooth on our phones. So at the time, that was kind of what was on my radar. I can't even remember some of the names of the people now, but pop songs and chart songs and things like that. So up until maybe 14, 15, I was kind of just doing that and sort of listening to what everybody else listened to, which was fine, like some great tunes back then. But then I sort of strayed off a little bit, and I think I saw a couple of shows in one year, and one of them was Kate Rusby, and the other one was Martin Joseph, who's a Welsh folk singer, songwriter. And I just loved the stories involved, like a lot. It just seemed like, not saying thought doesn't go into pop songs, because they're popular for a reason, like pop songs are great, but there was just more of a narrative in these folk songs that I just sort of connected with and wanted to find out more. And I think from reading at an early age, that interest was still there, and it sort of piqued my interest being in a song format. So I went along to I think it was a Christmas Kate Rusby concert, and the way she talked about the songs and delivered these songs and performed these songs, there was such a narrative there, which just really captured me, really. And so I just started listening to folk music more from that point, really.
I want to kind of talk about the transition from being a music lover to obviously playing music as a hobby and as a pastime, to kind of making that transition to becoming a professional full-time musician. And initially I wanted to ask you when you started playing music and when you started writing your own songs and lyrics. When did that kind of happen?
So I've always written, I started off by writing short stories. I'm not embarrassed to admit this, I was obsessed with Harry Potter when I was little. I love the books, and I still do. I really, really love the books. And I always used to write little short stories based off like the Harry Potter wizarding world. So I'd done a lot of sort of short story writing and dabbled a little bit in poetry. I don't really know too much about poetry. I'm sort of still getting into it a little bit, but I had a go at writing it, and eventually it just sort of turned into song, I think. I had a friend who showed me a couple of chords on guitar when I was maybe about 14 years old, and I think the first thing I learnt was like the sound of music or something very weird like that. And so I had a couple of chords on the guitar, and it was a really nice creative outlet to have, because at the time I was still doing a lot of sport, so I didn't really have that kind of outlet to sort of express my emotions, I guess. So I found guitar was a really, really good way of doing this, because there wasn't that. When I was younger, I studied violin. Well, I say studied, I went through sort of ABRSM exams and everything back in primary school, which I didn't really enjoy because it was very strict and stuffy, and, you know, having to practice all the time just didn't match my personality, I guess. So just sort of learning guitar and picking up a few chords on it, and just being able to express it without the stress and pressure of exams and having to practice, that sort of melded very well together with the short stories that I was writing, or like the poetry that I was writing. And I think one day in secondary school, I had an argument with somebody, or I'd had an argument with my mum, I can't remember now. I felt very kind of like angsty and just very kind of pissed off with the world, and just wanted to get my emotions out into the world. And I wrote a song, and that was the first song I ever wrote. And don't ask me about it because I cannot remember it. It was probably terrible. But I remember that point very well, of sitting in my room and writing that song and just kind of getting everything out onto a page. So that was, I guess that was when I was kind of like a hobbyist at songwriting and at music. Sort of went through the open mic phase of sort of doing like little feature slots here and there, which was really, really fun. Really, really enjoyed it. And then eventually moved on to doing headline stuff. And it wasn't really until during lockdown, sort of 2020, that it sort of turned into something a bit more professional. And now I'm at a point where I just try and write every day if I can. It's not so much the thing now of where I, like back in secondary school, where I go to school, I come home, do a bit of homework, and then, you know, if I feel like it, I'll write a bit of a song. Like now it's my whole life really. So yeah, just writing all the time. And I think that's the main difference, is just making myself knuckle down and just get stuff done when I need to.
We're obviously going to speak in detail about your musical career, particularly post 2020, when you said you've pretty much been a full-time professional musician. But interestingly, I kind of want to talk about the progression, how you've got to that particular phase in your life. And I wanted to begin with by asking you if you can recall your first live professional performance. And I also wanted to ask you, before performing as a solo artist, with a backing band, of course, were you in any other musical bands or projects?
So my first, probably would say professional performance, because I think that's been quite a gradual thing where I can't really pinpoint it. There's been some gigs which have definitely been massive highlights, but it's quite hard to kind of pin down like the first, I guess, professional gig I ever did. I remember the first open mic, and that was well, actually, two of these events took place at this venue. It's a beautiful venue in Kenilworth, which is a town just sort of down the road from me, and it's called the Treehouse Bookshop, which is run by a lovely lady, Victoria, who has put on some wonderful music events there over in the past. And at the time, there was a couple who was running an open mic, and it was completely unplugged. It was in this amazing bookshop, just full of like books everywhere, like every inch, every corner you looked in, there was a book. It was a beautiful, beautiful setting, like fairy lights and an acoustic upright piano. It was very, very wholesome. Wholesome is the word that I'll use. And I did my first open mic there. And the open mic was a combination of songs and poetry and spoken word and storytelling. So there was a real creative mixture, which kind of led me to meeting a lot of amazing people there as well. But that was the first open mic I ever did, and it was completely unplugged, and you could see the whole audience, and they were very close to you. It's very, very intimate and very cozy, which was absolutely terrifying. It was very, very scary. I can still remember the nerves now. It was really, really horrible, but I think I enjoyed it. I went back and I did another one, so I must have enjoyed it. So that was kind of my first performance out in the open to people. And then I went back, I think in 2017, and I did a headline show there for the release of my first ever EP. And yeah, again, it was the same sort of vibe. It was very cozy, very intimate. There were lots of people there, which was really, really nice. And again, I was absolutely terrified. But I think, like, if there was one point where I realised, like, yeah, I want to do this, it was definitely that gig, sort of performing all my own material to people. And they were very receptive and attentive and very lovely about it and very encouraging. And yeah, so the Treehouse venue, the Treehouse Bookshop venue in Kenilworth has really, really done a lot for my confidence, and they've been very supportive and very encouraging to me.
From your first performances as a musician, I wanted to move on and talk about songwriting, because we've spoken about songs and where songs come from and how you're inspired. And I'm always interested to find out how the process works from artist to artist. And I wanted to ask, for you, how does the songwriting process work? And how do you go about composing your material? Do your songs come from life experiences? And are there personal themes and subjects you like to explore?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, because I've sort of had a bit of a change in my songwriting style, I think. When I was younger and when I just started writing songs, I was living at home, I was going to school, so I had a very sort of narrow view on the world, and I was just writing about kind of like friendships and like boys who had broken my heart, that sort of thing. And I was very much stuck in the realm of just writing about that sort of stuff, which was fine, like, because that was what my experience was at the time. That's kind of what I knew about the world. And then I moved away to university, moved to Bristol, and my eyes were just opened to the diversity of people in this world, and I engaged more with the news and things going on in the world, which made me angry at times, and that sort of unlocked a different kind of you can use the word fire in my songwriting, because it just, I don't know, it kind of like lit something up that just made me hungry for writing songs. And so yeah, I'd kind of moved from this very blinkered view on the world to suddenly having my eyes open to so much that I'd never seen before. And that sort of changed my songwriting a little bit, because I started writing more about political things like climate change and like human rights and those kind of topics, which kind of I just found to be a bit more important than my own experience. I kind of felt like I wanted to share a message that was a bit more important than a boy who had broken my heart back in year 9. It just felt right to do. And so yeah, I started engaging with the news more, and yeah, my songwriting style changed a lot. And then I'm still doing that now. Like, I love writing about that sort of stuff. It really, really interests me, and really inspires me. But recently have kind of realised that maybe I'm writing a bit too much about other things and neglecting my own experiences, particularly with this upcoming album, which is coming out in September. The whole, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the whole album is based on Warwickshire folklore, where I grew up, which was so much fun to do, really, really good fun to do, sort of researching and putting all these songs and these narratives together. It was really, really good fun. But I've started now taking a bit more time to write about my own experiences again. Now I've sort of grown up and gone through the ranks of uni and living away from home and returning back home and dealing with COVID, and a lot's happened in the past 2 years that has changed a lot of people's views on the world, I'm sure. So yeah, it's kind of been an interesting change and ever evolving thing that's going on.
I wanted to ask about the process for you. Do you write at a specific sort of time of day, or is it the question of an idea might come into your mind and all of a sudden you want to put that down on paper or start recording something? And is the process quite easy, or does it take time for you to kind of compose and write the lyrics for a particular song or a project?
Yeah, it's very dependent on the song, really, and how I sort of feel that day. Like, have I had enough fresh air? Have I had enough sleep? Is my brain working properly? And I think that was kind of the main difference between going from like a hobbying songwriter to a jobbing songwriter, is just having to write each day. That makes it sound like a chore. It's definitely not a chore. I love it so much, but kind of implementing things that will help me if I ever get stuck, because I'm sure you're the same with writing and things like that. You're never going to be inspired every single day. Some days you just don't want to do it. Like, you don't feel like you have much to say, but I find that just writing a little bit each day definitely helps with my creativity. I do find I work best at night, but my body clock doesn't allow that, so I do have to find ways to work around it. So I've started doing this thing. I've done it for a couple of years now, of free writing, where each day I'll just take a pen to paper and write for 10 minutes without any idea of kind of grammar or punctuation or whether the word exists or has a meaning. I'll just write to get stuff out of my brain onto a page, and then kind of work with that during the day. Because yeah, as I say, like, you're never going to feel creative all the time, and you've got to sort of have that sort of using that muscle of writing every day. Kind of, it builds it up so that you're able to be a bit more creative, I guess. I think I've just explained that really badly. I've gone on a bit of a ramble there, but yeah, just finding different tasks that I can do each day to keep my mind working and keep myself writing. Did that answer your question? I feel like I rambled a lot then.
You answered the question very well indeed, Ellie. That was perfectly fine. I want to kind of move on now to turn the clock back to 2 years, to 2020. which for me, it seems to be a very productive period in your life, which is kind of unusual because it was during the time of the global pandemic. And despite having to put your musical plans on hold, you were, as I said, productive during the period because you took part in various online collaborations, wrote many new songs. You started working as a lead vocalist in the Filkin's Drift Ensemble project. What do you think the period taught you musically? And how do you look back at the experiences of 2020 from sort of a personal perspective and a life experience perspective, as well as a creative one?
Yeah, it's interesting because I kind of feel like the past 2 years just haven't happened. They just went very, very quickly. Like it's almost been, it's been over 2 years since the pandemic started, which is absolutely mad to think about. Because it feels like yesterday, but it also feels like 10 years ago. It's so bizarre. And yeah, as you were saying, like I was very busy during lockdown, which I feel very lucky to have been. Very, very lucky. I had some amazing opportunities, which I probably wouldn't have had if the pandemic wasn't a thing, which I feel a bit weird saying because obviously like it was a terrible time for lots of people. But yeah, I had an amazing 2020 planned out before COVID. I was doing gigs in places where I'd never been before, and I was about to play some really amazing festivals and really amazing gigs, and that all got cancelled in about 3 days, which was very, very weird. So to be fair, for the first like 3-4 months of the pandemic, I just sat at home playing Sims all day. Like I just didn't feel creative or inspired at all. I don't think I touched my guitar for about 4 or 5 months. I had no want to do it because there was nothing really to look forward to. And yeah, it's just a very, very weird headspace. So I think I tried to ignore it by playing Sims for a lot of that, for a lot of the first few months. But yeah, and then these online collaborations started being a thing. You sort of saw a couple of bits pop up here and there. And there were a couple of people who I'd met at a festival back in 2019, and we said we'd eventually get together and do some singing together and writing, which of course never happens because they live, up in Wales and they live over in Kent. And, in normal times, like it would have been hard to have planned that. But online working suddenly became more of a thing, and we were allowed and we were able to do that. So yeah, I had some amazing collaborations with a couple of people. There was one guy called Ben. We did a Nick Jones song together, which I'm really proud of, and he's just recorded that on an album as well. And you mentioned Filkin's Drift. I met Seth and Chris, who were the duo of Filkin's Drift. I met them online over lockdown, and Seth's just recorded strings on my album, and as you said, I'm now lead vocalist in the Filkin's Ensemble. So many amazing opportunities came out of this time, which I'm very, very thankful for, and as I say, feel very, very lucky to have had. And I also started working with a lovely team, Joe and Ant, who's my manager and my agent. And again, I probably wouldn't have had that opportunity if it weren't for lockdown and sort of, I guess, just building up more of an online presence, because everything is very, well, as you know, everything is so online these days that beforehand I didn't really think about it as much. And over lockdown, that was kind of the only platform that there was, really, sort of online gigs and social media. So it kind of, stepped up my online presence a little bit. That's one thing that I learnt. But I think I also learnt just to take things slowly and adopt a slower pace of life, and not be so frantic all the time, which I feel like a bit of a hypocrite saying now, because now it's sort of almost gone back to normal. I am back to that frantic rushing around. But yeah, I think some days I just try to remember that I can take it a bit slower, and just try and get myself slowed down a bit more and kind of sit within that creative space and not worry too much about having to be here on time and having to be here on time. So yeah, it was a really interesting experience, that fateful year. Very interesting.
I wanted to come on now and talk specifically about one of your singles, which received quite a lot of exposure, and that was Against the Tide, which featured on the EP Parting Breath. I wanted to ask, what's the single about? And can you discuss the process of recording the EP and actually filming and editing the Against the Tide music video?
Yeah, so Against the Tide was written a long time ago now, sort of in the first couple of years of uni. And it's about my love-hate relationship with social media and kind of social conventions and social conditioning, and trying to fight against that, I guess. Sort of the tide being the metaphor for, social conditioning and conventions, and just trying to work against that, I guess. And yeah, that was actually recorded in Bristol back in 2018, I think it was, with an amazing band, really, really lovely band. And we worked with a guy called Tim at JJ's studio in Bristol. And it was a really amazing experience. It was originally just supposed to be a single, but then over 2020, I met Lucas Drinkwater, who's an incredible double bassist. And we worked together on this EP, Parting Breath. And so we had Against the Tide, which was recorded back in Bristol. And then we had 3 other songs, Parting Breath, Eva, and... oh my gosh.
So
I've had brain freeze. Oh no, that's so bad. It's literally my own song as well.
It's always the worst thing in the moment as well, when you're trying to think of a name and it always escapes you.
Oh, this is awful, isn't it? Parting Breath, Eva, Sky's on Fire. The Sky's on Fire. And then Against the Tide. Oh gosh. There's one thing that COVID gave me. It was major brain fog. And yeah, so I can't remember where I met Lucas now. We'd done a couple of gigs together pre-COVID. So sort of knew each other that way. And we did a couple of online stuff as well over COVID. And yeah, so in the break between lockdowns in December 2020, I went down to Stroud and we recorded this EP in I think it was like 3 or 4 days. So it was quite intense. But yeah, just super, super happy with the outcome. It was a very weird way of working because, as I said, everything was online. So it was me, Lucas, a guy called Alex Garden on fiddle, and then Seth By on accordion. So that was all done remotely. So I'd put some ideas down and I'd send it to Alex, and Alex would then put some ideas down and send it back to me, and I'd send it to Lucas, and Lucas would send it to Seth. And so it was kind of this little network where songs were constantly moving around online. So we never really had the chance to get into a room with each other and just jam some ideas out. So I quite like to wonder, what it would have sounded like if we had been in a room together. Like, would it be any different? So yeah, it was a very interesting new way of working, but yeah, eventually we got to the studio and recorded it, and yeah, it was a really, really great experience.
Off the back of the exposure of the single, I wanted to move on and talk about an interesting experience in your life, and I'm particularly interested to ask you this because I've seen so many of the videos on YouTube, and these are the TEDx talks. And I wanted to ask how that actually happened. And can you describe the overall experience? And do you think it gave more people exposure who weren't necessarily aware of your music?
Yeah, it was a very weird day, very surreal and very, very strange. I'd never done anything like it before and haven't really done anything like it since. I'm trying to remember now how I got it. I think I got it from a friend. I got it through a friend who had done it previously. Their band had done it previously. And TEDx were looking for musicians just to kind of space out the talk. So you kind of had a group of talks and then some music to break it up, and then some other talks, and then a bit of music. And it was... The speakers were all local, I think. They were local to the area. It was a local TEDx. It was based in Leamington Spa, and it was held at one of the colleges, Warwickshire College. And yeah, it was a really, really great event. And as I said, they kind of booked some musical acts to break up the speaking. Otherwise, it was just a day of heavy talks back to back. But I thought they had asked me to do a talk, not realising that they just wanted music. So I kind of took it upon myself to create this spiel before I played my song. And I think I probably went a bit overboard now thinking back to it, because I sort of, talked about the song in great depth and how I wrote it and whatnot. I'm trying, because there was a theme for the TEDx day, and I'm trying to remember what it is now, and I cannot remember. But there was a...
Did you find the experience nerve-wracking? Because obviously you're so used to performing in front of an audience, and I can imagine even still as a musician, you still get nerves on the night, but it's something you just become accustomed to. But that's kind of almost a different experience, playing to kind of a different audience that are almost there to listen to a lecture or debate or to be given some knowledge on a particular subject. So did you find it quite daunting in any way?
Yeah, definitely. I had major imposter syndrome, because I was like, why am I here? I don't deserve to be here. Like, there's so many people who have done incredible things, and I'm just here like writing songs. It was terrifying. And as well, like the whole public speaking aspect of it as well, I can very easily perform in front of probably thousands of people and not really feel that nervous. But public speaking in front of even like 10, 15 people, things like interviews, things like this, like, it just terrifies me, because speaking and singing are two totally different things. Like, you have, with singing, you've got lots of time to prepare and practice, and I always like to know what I'm going to be doing and what I'm going to be saying. But things like interviews and public speaking, and my brain always works a bit faster than my mouth does, so I always get worried about public speaking in front of lots of people. So that aspect of it was terrifying. But once I'd got the spiel out of the way and got into the song, it was fine. But I had some really lovely feedback on it, and I got quite a few gig opportunities out of it as well. So yeah, it was a really great experience. They had an amazing gin bar as well, which is one thing I remember very, very well.
Always goes down a treat.
Yeah. But it was an amazing day. I met so many incredible people who had so many amazing stories to tell. And we still keep in touch as well, which is nice. So yeah, it was a really, really surreal event.
I wanted to kind of stay on the theme of performance. And obviously you've played across the UK at many different venues and at festivals as well. But do you have any favourite venues that you've performed at, or festivals? And I wanted to ask you why. And do you, as an artist, do you prefer performing at maybe a smaller venue or more intimate venue? Or do you kind of like playing to a bigger, sort of maybe louder crowd?
Yeah, I think my preference will always be the smaller intimate venues, in terms of sort of telling a story and having people being attentive and listening to you. Because it would be amazing to play at, like Wembley Stadium or something, but I think just like the nature of what I do and the amount of chat I do between songs, it just probably wouldn't like sit that well with people in those kind of audiences. So yeah, I think I'm always going to prefer kind of the smaller intimate venues. I did a gig at the Cecil Sharp House in London back in May on my May tour, and that was just incredible, and I think will probably be one of the standout gigs for a while. It was really, really special. Do you know the Cecil Sharp House? Are you familiar with it?
No, not familiar with it at all. No.
So it's home to the library of folk music, and it's got so many books in there full of folk song and traditions and folk music, and it's an incredible place where so many people have played before who I really admire. And we were playing in the smaller hall downstairs, and there was just such an amazing atmosphere there of like the people were amazing and the sound was really great. And it was a trio gig, so it was me, Lucas, and my friend Emily on the violin. We kind of felt really like together on stage, and it was an amazing experience. It's an amazing venue, full of so much history and stories. So that was probably one of my favourite venues so far. Another one I did back in May was the Warwick Arts Centre, which is kind of my local arts centre, which was, again, really, really special. It's a place where I'd wanted to play for a very long time. So yeah, I think those are the two kind of in recent memory, those are the two that really sort of stand out to me. I'm doing a couple of festivals this year, which I'm really excited about. There's Warwick Folk Festival, which is my local hometown folk festival. And then doing Bromyard and Moseley Folk Festival as well. So yeah, I think there's going to be some really nice quality gigs coming up this year, which will be really lovely.
I want to talk about another project that you worked on this year as we move into the medium of radio, and you're involved in producing the music for the BBC Radio Free play Middlemarch. And I wanted to ask you, how did the experience of composing the music for an audio play differ to producing your own material? And how did you find the overall experience? And what were your thoughts when you heard the work broadcast on Radio Free?
Yeah, it was, I really loved it. I really loved it. I'd never done anything like that before. It was a really interesting experience, which taught me so much about sort of not working with words, because a lot of the time everything I do is very heavily centered around words, so I kind of rely on that. But in this case, I had to rely on instruments and sounds and textures to kind of bring this character to life. So the radio play was Middlemarch, George Eliot's Middlemarch, and I think it's part of City of Culture, Coventry City of Culture, and it was Coventry City of Culture and Warwick Arts working in conjunction with each other, I think, and they'd pulled a load of local people who rewrote monologues based on each character of Middlemarch, touching on current themes like climate change, inequality, and racism, and topics like that. And it was really interesting to see it being brought to life. So how did I approach it? I approached it by looking at each character first and kind of getting an idea of their personality and their view on the world and kind of, who they were. And then I had a very limited amount of instruments to use. I had guitar, mandolin, violin, and my voice. So I kind of tried to create a lot of atmosphere with my vocals first and foremost, and came up with a couple of different melodies on guitar and on the mandolin. So I think it ended up sounding quite folky, but that's just my style, I guess. It was hard to kind of stray away from that. And yeah, I pulled down some sound bites of a loom as well, a weaving loom. Warwickshire is quite famous for the silk ribbon weaving trade, so I found some sound samples of weaving looms, and sort of warped them a little bit to create a percussive bass to some of these tracks. So that was really cool. I'd never done anything like that before, so I learned a little bit about working with sound samples and whatnot and creating an atmosphere that way. But yeah, it was a really good experience. I'd love to do it again. I haven't actually listened to it back yet. It's a little bit too soon. I'm gonna wait for a little bit and then listen to it back soon. I usually like to let my music sit a little bit before I listen to it. Otherwise, I'm too critical with it. But yeah, I was very, very happy with the outcome.
We've only briefly discussed the new album, and you mentioned that it's scheduled for release in September. The debut album's called Dwelling by the Weir. Can you tell us about the songs on the album and how the recording process went? And as you said, it's going to be released in September. How's it going to be released? I guess digitally, CD, vinyl perhaps. Can you tell us a little bit about what the plan is to kind of release the album and then obviously tour it as well?
Yeah, so the album is called Dwelling by the Weir, and in the old Saxon language, Dwelling by the Weir is the old Saxon translation of Warwick, which is where I grew up, and it was the idea first came to me at my graduation back in 2019, because I was moving home and I sort of needed a project to focus on, and didn't really get much time to sit with it because 2019 was quite a busy year. And it wasn't until lockdown, where I was stuck at home in Warwickshire, that I really had time to kind of sink my teeth into it. We had our daily walks, which allowed me to kind of rediscover places that I'd grown up in, and like I found loads of new places as well to explore. So I really enjoyed the process. It was a long process. It was quite overwhelming. I think the first thing I did was order a ton of books on Warwickshire folklore, which kind of sat staring at me for a good couple of months, because it was just very overwhelming being presented with all these stories that I had to pick from, really. But I did a lot of just rambling around, really. I visited lots of villages and lots of towns in Warwickshire, particularly up north as well. There's a very big divide between the north and south of Warwickshire, so I made a point of going up north and exploring some of those villages as well, which were beautiful, and I found out so much about this county which I'd never been taught before. So I did that, and I spoke to lots of local historians as well, and visited the local archive offices. So yeah, my mind was just exploding with all this information and all these stories. There's such a rich history here, and so yeah, I had a good handful of stories which eventually made their way into songs. Some were a bit harder to write than others, but there's stuff on there. Sort of themes about belonging and love and loss and nostalgia and home. So it's stuff that, although it is kind of a Warwickshire album, there's stuff that I think lots of people can relate to. But there's songs on there from like women navigating the waterways and the canals and the rivers, ecological devastation that HS2 is giving us because we're being absolutely ransacked by them at the moment. There's stuff on there about communities persevering and coming together in times of hardship. So there's lots of interesting subjects on there which I was very passionate about telling, and the things that I felt needed to be said. So yeah, and so I had this catalogue of songs, and I then went down to just outside of Chippenham, a place called Cullearn, which is very close to Peter Gabriel's studio. It wasn't Peter Gabriel's studio, but it was very close. It was in the realms of. And I worked with this wonderful producer called Josh Clark, who plays with Kate Risby, actually. He does a lot of stuff for her. So that was really, really cool. And yeah, we just had an amazing couple of weeks down there. He's got a beautiful studio on this estate down in Gloucester, and it's just very peaceful and very quiet. And I think it embodied a lot of what I kind of have here in Warwick, so it kind of felt like a home away from home. I felt very comfortable there making these songs, and we had a really, really lovely couple of weeks of watching these songs come to life. And again, we hadn't really had much time to sit in a room all together and plan out these songs, so it was quite not experimental, but there was a lot of kind of playing around with ideas in the studio and coming up with things there on the spot. So yeah, that was a really great experience. And then it was recorded, it was mixed, it was mastered, and we now have a final copy of the CD. We've just done a May tour, which was kind of a preview tour of this album, so it gave people the chance to come along to the shows and buy the CD before anybody else can. We've just released the first single off it, which is called Brightest Moon, which is about the Coventry Blitz and about people letting in refugees into their home and sort of welcoming them in. It's a very sad story. I won't go into it too much, but yeah, it's kind of a story about people persevering and coming together during hard times. And we created a video for that, me and a lady named Emily. We kind of played around with projections and lighting to convey this narrative through video, which was a lot of fun. And then, yeah, so we've just done a May tour, done the single release. There's another single coming out very soon, which I'm yet to announce. And then, as you say, we've got the album coming out in September, which will be followed by a November tour.
Shortly, we come on to that moment in the interview where we ask, all Your Take guests the same 13 questions to wrap up the interview and kind of find out maybe some things about you, Ellie, that we weren't aware of before the interview. But the last question I wanted to ask you is, what does the future hold for Ellie Gowers, and what are your career plans, and would you like to do anything creatively outside of music?
Yeah, I mean, that's always such a hard question because you get plans, but then sometimes those plans get moved around. COVID. Yeah, so we've just got a year now of festivals and gigs coming up, and we'll probably be the same next year as well. Starting to think about a second album, which is quite exciting. But yeah, just sort of riding on the wave of this album at the moment. And yeah, excited to see what comes up of it. We spoke about this before the interview, but I'm actually at St George's in November in Bristol, which I'm really, really looking forward to. I love that venue so much. So yeah, just keep on keeping on, lots of gigs, lots of festivals, making and writing songs all the time. Something else creative that I'd like to do. I think I'd like to start... I've always wanted to do a songwriters circle, so I think if that's something creative that I had the chance to do out of what I do now, it would be curating a songwriters circle. I think that would be quite cool, and having a songwriting evening. Yeah, or writing a book. I'd like to write a book, but I don't have the time for that at the moment.
We're going to move on now to the final 13 questions, Ellie. You don't have to think about these in any depth. We basically try and find out things you like, maybe things you're not so keen on, and things you may be interested in outside of your day-to-day life or outside of music. So here we go. Number one, Ellie, what would you say is your favourite pastime?
I have lots of favourite pastimes. I have a hard time choosing because it depends on the day, but I think reading, running, and I go horse riding a bit, so I think horse riding as well.
We've spoken about music. We've touched a little bit on radio. We've even spoken about a tradition in your family with the theatre and the stage, but we're yet to speak about cinema. Do you have a favourite film? And if so, which one?
I'm not really a film person, but I have watched Interstellar recently, and I loved that. Sort of very... You come away with existential crisis, which is always nice to have. Yeah, I think I'd say probably Interstellar. I did mention this earlier, but I do love the Harry Potter films, and Lord of the Rings as well. Sort of fantasy escapism type films.
From a choice, Christopher Nolan's Interstellar, we move on to books, and we've already established your love of literature. But who would you cite as your favourite novelist?
Jane Austen.
A favourite Jane Austen book?
Persuasion. Which was, funnily enough, Persuasion, because the Austen family spent a bit of time at Stoneleigh, which is a village just down the road from me. And Persuasion was based on a story that actually happened at Stoneleigh. So I think there's more of a connection to that book that I feel than some of the others. But yeah, Persuasion.
If you could have chosen a different profession outside of music, what would it have been?
I think conservation of some type, whether that be sort of ecological with nature or animals.
Who in life would you choose as your greatest inspiration?
Probably my grandma, for kind of instilling my love of literature and local history as well. She's a local historian, so when it came to the album, we chatted a lot about finding local history out and things like that. So yeah, my grandma.
There was a point in our discussion where you mentioned liking to keep up to date with news, current affairs, topical issues, and you're particularly passionate on certain things which we've discussed in the hour. But do you read a newspaper? And if so, which one?
Not really. If there's one on my dad's kitchen table, I'll sometimes flick through it and do the Sudoku. But no, I don't really seek out newspapers.
From the press now to food, what would you say is your favourite food?
Probably veggie sushi. Itsu Sushi is the one.
The next question always kind of stumps a lot of our guests. We ask them to choose their favorite cultural icon. It could be maybe a political figure, maybe someone who's revolutionized the world in a certain way, maybe a campaigner, an important figure from history. Who would you choose?
I think someone who immediately springs to mind is David Bowie, purely for the glitz and the glam and the fashion and the colours and yeah, Ziggy Stardust era, David Bowie.
I think Bowie was an incredible artist. I think it
Yeah.
was sad that we lost him at quite a young age, I guess. He was only in his early 70s. But the thing I thought was incredible about him was he just kept recreating himself,
Hmm.
and he just did it so well, you know.
Yeah, I love that idea. Yeah.
He certainly wasn't a one-trick pony, and he just kind of, yeah, it was just incredible. His changes throughout decade to decade, and his music
Yeah, and to be
output.
fair, now you've mentioned that, I'd probably also, without any shame, also say Taylor Swift. For similar reasons, sort of reinventing yourself, and yeah, I think that's really cool.
I'm not sure I should be asking a young lady this question next, but what would you say is your favorite curse word and why?
I'm not going to say it because it's fun. My mum or my grandma will probably watch this and will not want to hear that word come out of my mouth. I save it purely for drivers on the road.
We'll move on swiftly before I get an ear bashing from your family and being told to put words into your mouth that I shouldn't do. You're somebody interested in place and location. That's come across today. But what would you say is your favorite place or maybe favorite holiday destination?
Ooh. To be fair, I love anywhere with just open land. So places like Scottish Highlands, North Wales. I spend a lot of time down in Dartmoor with my grandma, and there's some beautiful places out there where it's just completely untouched by man. There's no telephone poles or anything like that. It's just complete openness where you just want to walk into the horizon and keep going. So yeah, I think those sort of places, but Dartmoor definitely.
I'm never really keen to ask a musician this question, but I will. Who is your favorite music artist? And what would you cite as your favorite all-time album? And maybe an album that you go back to on a regular basis and have to listen to.
Yeah, I mean, I think Joni Mitchell will always be it for me. She's someone who I always go back to. John Martin, I'm the same with. Like, if I don't know what I want to listen to, I'll just, like, by default, just go to Joni or to John Martin. They're, yeah, massive inspirations to me. The album Blue is probably one of my favourites. But I think with albums, it changes a lot of the time. I sort of go through phases with albums. I think Blue is probably one of my favourites, but Court and Spark as well. At the moment, I'm loving Harry Styles' new album, which is very good, full of absolute bangers. So yeah, I think albums, it changes a lot of the time, but I always kind of end back at Joni Mitchell and John Martin.
Two incredible artists. I always thought John Martin had a beautiful voice, and he's an incredible player, but I've kind of thought what was incredible about him was he had so many troubles and demons in his life, but that never sort of ever really affected the music.
No. I think maybe towards the later end of his life, where he was almost inaudible in what he was singing, maybe affected it that way. But no, completely true.
Next one, Ellie, I wanted to ask, what is your greatest achievement to date so far?
This week I managed to find a kilo of cherries for £2.40 in Tesco's. Oh. Yeah, in recent memory, that would be my greatest achievement, because cherries are expensive, so I was very proud about that.
I think we've done 70 interviews so far, and I think that's the best answer I've heard so far for that one. And
I'm very good at sniffing out supermarket deals, so that's probably one of my greatest achievements in that realm. That's a very hard question. Greatest achievement? I think probably at the moment is probably this album. Very excited to put it out, and yeah, very, very proud of it.
And then the final one, Ellie Gowers, from a young perspective, how do you wish to be remembered?
makes a mean cherry crumble.
And why not?
Yeah, hopefully something a bit more profound than that, but that'd be a good reputation to have.
Ellie, thank you kindly for joining me for the last hour for your take.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been good fun.
There's a few things that we kind of could have spoken a bit more about, which we didn't, which I'm kind of a bit disappointed about, because obviously I'm based in Bristol and there was a Bristol connection with your study in Bristol. So we could have explored that maybe a little more as well. But I wish you all the very best with the album release, your future musical career. I'm sure you've got a great career ahead of you. And
thank you.
Also today, there was a few moments where you said about, performing on stage for you is quite easily, if you feel calm and relaxed performing your music to people and confident in that sort of realm. And then likewise, you said doing interviews is kind of, a different thing altogether. But I found it a really enjoyable experience, and you haven't come across like that at all. You've come across as very confident, very talkative. Nice and it's just been a really interesting interview. Lastly, I wanted to ask, we've heard about kind of your musical journey, but how do we find out more? How do we listen to more of your music, your website, your social media, etc.? And when can we see you performing live with your recent tour?
Yeah, it's just Ellie Gowers on Spotify and Apple Music, and my website's elliegowersmusic.com, same as Facebook and Instagram. So yeah, just type in Ellie Gowers and you'll find something. There's a golf player called Ellie Gowers as well. I'm not a golf player, so don't go to that website. I mean, if you like golf, then do go to that, but that's not me. I've got a tour coming up in late November, which hasn't been announced yet, but I will be at St. George's and some other really, really lovely venues. Other than that, doing a few festivals this year: Warwick Folk Festival, Bromyard, Moseley. There are a couple more which have escaped my memory now. I'm doing Gate to Southall with Filkin's Ensemble. That will be our first kind of proper live gig together, which will be very exciting. So there's that as well. So yeah, just keep an eye out on the website, and there's always stuff being updated on there.
Thank you again for taking part, and I look forward to seeing you live on the stage in November at St. George's in Bristol here.
Yeah, thanks, James. Thanks for having me.